Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. I am extremely excited to welcome you all here. This, of course, is my chat with a legend, absolute legend in the business. I was going to do the classic joke where I'd say he needs no introduction, therefore I'm not going to do one. But I thought that was ridiculous, so I'm not going to do that. That's a bit too silly. Not going to do that. But many of you will know, of course, because you're on the call for this very reason, that Mike is an absolute legend. Of course, he has variety of different things. He's got over 20 years of experience. I'm just a guy that kind of works out stuff with AI and has worked in HR tech for a while and done some clever stuff with employee engagement and with your flock and these other things. My internal comms journey most probably started about 10 years ago. Mike's is twice that, I think even more than twice that. He's worked with just huge companies doing this. He is almost Mr. Internal Comms. He's one of the reasons actually why I started doing this fortnightly thing, talking to internal comms people. So I without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Mike. Mike, give us a quick, I know it's almost impossible to do, but give me a quick 5-pointer on your amazing career and where you are now with all the things you do.
All right. Well, I've actually been at this for about 25 years. Did my first project when I was at London Business School back in '97. And I've seen the field evolve and not evolve over that time. I mean, one of the biggest complaints that people have about internal communication is that the conversation never changes. Well, it's starting to change in a big way, and AI's got a lot, not everything, but a lot to do that. Many of you might not know this, but I'm based in Iceland, have been living here for the last 5 years. I actively promote remote work, and I practice what I preach, even though I have an office now because my wife thinks I'm too loud. I've lived and worked in a total of 7 different countries. I'm the founder of We Lead Comms, a global recognition program that's got 21,000 plus followers and has recognized more than 1,000 communication leaders and initiatives around the world. And recently I became editor-in-chief of Strategic Magazine, which is aiming to become the go-to source for communication leadership, thought leadership, and guidance on how to navigate the disruption that we're experiencing in the world today. And speaking of navigating disruption, I also co-host the Navigating Disruption podcast with the amazing Janet Hitchin.
You see, what did I say, ladies and gentlemen? What did I say? Absolute legend. And as I say, I'm very lucky that I'm slightly involved in the strategic projects. And I asked my AI to do a very long intro. I'm going to do a bit of a blog about you as well, Mike, because I'm a massive fan. But my AI very much linked into that strategic work that you're doing, and also the We Lead Comms. We met, of course, at Comms Hero, didn't we?
Comms Hero, Asif Chowdhury, another IC legend.
Absolutely. I'm hoping to get him on. I'm hoping to get him on the call maybe in the next couple of weeks, a couple of months as well. But they had their 10th anniversary, and as have been asking me for a while to go and do a keynote, and I did one around AI, which is my segue into not only how we met, but also AI, because I was reading all your just fantastic thoughts around them. And it literally, everyone, please do read Mike's thoughts on this whole subject. It is amazing, the stuff that you're coming up with and thinking. And so I've got a few questions, if I may. But actually, before that, I'm going to slightly put you on the spot and just ask you a personal question. I was talking this morning with somebody, and they wanted me to ask this question, which is, what do you think is the number one pain point for internal communicators and internal communication in 2025? I put you on the spot there a little bit, Mike, because someone texted me this morning and said, you've got to ask Mike this question. So I'm going to.
Well, I think the big pain point that we have this year is people seeing our relevance in a time of near total unpredictability and chaos. And it should be obvious, but it's not necessarily obvious. And you're going to have, a bunch of people, I kind of call them meatheads, who are going to look at budgets and just say, we're cutting 20% or we're cutting this. And, why do we need all these internal comms people and culture people? Why don't we just tell people what to do and expect them to do it? Yeah. And, that's a real issue. And many of us don't have a one-sentence defense. And it's got to be a company-specific one-sentence defense. I'm not going to give that to you, although it may come up in the conversation today. But the biggest pain point is being able to instantly define your own relevance in a way that moves a leader, not just to keep you, but to let you do what you need to do.
I love that. There you go. There you go. The lady who asked me to ask that question must be very happy with the answer. But I think that's a really, really important point. So in your work you were talking about, and also the stuff I've written, kind of helped write slightly, but also been reading, or brilliant work that you've been doing. You talk about having a hand on the wheel, and I suppose this links very much into your answer, right, Mike? You know, this is so I had a question: how is AI kind of reshaping what having a hand on the wheel means, really looks like in internal communication leaders in this something that I like to call the fifth industrial revolution? That might be a bit much, but of course it ties into the book that I wrote around this. But I think we're in that bit of mass uncertainty and huge change, and this is why internal communicators actually are tremendously important. But how is AI reshaping that having a hand on the wheel moment in your mind and your thoughts?
Well, I think the hand on the wheel moment, it's always been a hand on the wheel. Internal communication, the words, the tone, and focus of what gets communicated in an organization, it impacts the priorities, it impacts how employees see the company in their own roles, and it impacts the way the organization sees itself. And the key thing about having a hand on the wheel, we don't have the only hand on the wheel, not by a long shot, but if you're looking at a bow, you turn that wheel a half degree, 1 degree, and it either hits the port, it either goes into port or it goes off course.
Yeah.
So without us, the odds that the organization is going to go off course or land somewhere which is less than optimal is that much higher. And so in the age of AI, it becomes that much more important because AI is not autopilot. You don't just walk in and push a button and everything comes out exactly the way it's supposed to come out. If there's a slight flaw in the reasoning, if there's, a slight error in, the quote that gets lifted from the annual report, if somebody's not looking at what goes out, it can have huge impacts. And we're talking about minuscule amounts of money. In the latest state of the Gallagher Employee Experience, or whatever they're calling it, report these days.
Yeah.
One of the things that they mentioned is that internal comms budgets very rarely cross the 7-figure mark. Even, unduly don't even cross the 6-figure mark. And these are in organizations that generate billions or millions or hundreds of millions of bucks in revenue. The dirty little secret of internal comms is how cheap it is relative to the impact it has. I mean, it's so cheap that even if we're able to measure a percentage of our impact, it should definitely cover our costs and probably, actually make us a profit center in the organization. Now, the measures that we have for doing that are somewhat imprecise, unfortunately. But the extent to which people go out of their way not to spend a few $100,000 on internal comms and end up wasting tens, billions, what have you, is the stuff that, somebody should do a movie about this.
I love it.
But, when you're looking at AI, the risk increases exponentially because there's no, AI has no accountability. What are you going to do? Fire Claude and replace it with ChatGPT?
Well,
it's not even going to show up for the performance review.
I love that. True. But you could always, and this is what I talk about in my training. It's always good to swap them in and swap them out. I don't think they have any emotions around whether they're gone. But as you rightly say, AI doesn't have that accountability, but human beings very much do. And so that's really, I mean, that isn't our job now to be kind of the managers of those different AIs, right? I mean, that's kind of, we've got to be managing these AI
Not just
interns.
the managers, not just the people who push the buttons, I've always said that one of the most, indeed the most important role of a decent internal comms person is to ask good questions. And if you think that asking good questions is important in a board meeting or important in a conversation with a manager or at a management conference, asking a good question of AI is pretty damn essential. I mean, there's kind of two really essential things you have to do with AI. Is A, you've got to make sure that you've asked the best possible questions. You got to practice, you got to play with it. The second thing is you've got to make sure that if there's data that you know needs to be going into the content, you need to make sure the AI has that data at hand and that data overrides whatever it is that's already in the system.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I was playing with this yesterday because, I bought an apartment, my wife and I bought an apartment in Iceland last summer. And we've got a tax bill that, we were expecting this. What we weren't expecting was for the dollar to fall by 8%, in that period of time. So I'm asking AI, what does this mean? How do you calculate this? And the first time I did it, it came up with an exchange rate from a week ago. And you got to say, no, the exchange rate is this. Can you recalculate? Can you recalculate?
Yeah.
You've got to know at least as much as the AI knows about the topic that you're talking about.
Well, I mean, and that's the thing, isn't it? We cannot presuppose that AI is infallible. In fact, far from it. In fact, the hallucinations actually are more of a feature than a bug because it's great at creating stuff, right? So that kind of links into my second thing around, I think a lot of people are using AI to generate content, and that can be quite creative. And so those hallucination and bugs actually are that feature. But you talked about questioning there. Do you think that AI has an ability, or potentially, if it's well trained and well prompted and you choose the right one, does that have an ability to kind of elevate internal communicators' kind of questioning skills? Because that's where you're kind of saying that's where the value is, right? So do you think AI can help with that? You don't have to think that it can, by the way, Mike, because I know you're playing around with things.
Oh, I certainly think that it can. I mean, what I would do is I would ask, do about maybe a half dozen queries, and then you can always ask the question, what are the questions that I haven't asked that you might want to consider here? And pretty much any AI tool can do this. Now, it may come back with stupid questions or obvious stuff, but if it adds one additional decent question to the mix, it certainly earned the 2 cents you've extracted from the $20 a month pro subscription.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's the thing, isn't it? AI, because I think a lot of people are wanting it to have all the answers, but actually you really want to be priming it to make you better at asking questions. And as you say, if you can train it well enough and you learn how to do it yourself, which is prompt engineering and a load of other stuff, which I help with people with training, but getting to that bit where you don't think AI is going to do it all, but it adds enough value. That's what I'm kind of keep teaching people. It's look at it like an automated intern. It's an intern. It's not your boss. It's an intern, and interns can add value, and interns can be creative, but don't presume that they're going to be, you always have to manage them anyway. Yeah, but that's the thing. So I love the fact, I mean, and here's kind of off topic a little bit here, Mike, but I did say we might riff a bit. So how would kind of an internal communicator do that moment? I know that the prompt's going to make a big difference, but is there any way that they can utilize internal data? And do you have any kind of, not necessarily top tips, but almost top tips?
Oh yeah. I mean, it depends on which tool you're using. I mean, anybody in corporate who's using a free subscription is taking immense risk.
Amen. Yeah.
And I wouldn't be throwing any proprietary data into a free version of a platform. But on the other hand, if you've got a paid version, the opportunities it opens up for analysis of quantitative data, qualitative data, and my favorite, the transformation of qualitative data into quantitative data. It does it extremely well and extremely quickly. Like, here's an example.
Mm-hmm.
About 3 years ago, working with Katie McCauley at AB, we put together something called the Communication Leaders Survey. And the Communication Leaders Survey was different from all the other surveys because, rather than like what was state of the sector at the time, mm-hmm. which had pretty much all quantitative questions. This was based on qualitative questions about how people saw their role in the industry, saw their experiences with their companies, and saw as the future trends. And so we asked them, what are the top 3 trends facing the industry? What are the top 3 issues that you're facing in doing your job.
Mm-hmm.
And what this produced was a lot of open-ended data, which I then manually categorized. And so what I did recently was I took those data sheets, all the names were scrubbed, of course, but I took those data sheets, ran them into Claude, and asked Claude what he'd do to interpret the data.
Mm-hmm.
What Claude came back with in about 30 seconds was about 90% similar to what it took me 2 days to analyze.
Absolutely.
With by hand brute force analysis. And it did I threw in the categories. You got to define your own categories before you do this. It does take some work.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, you can define your categories on 20 entries, but then I put in about 450 entries into this platform, into Claude, and it came up with a report that had about 90% of what I was saying. It was awful close.
Wow.
Then what I did was I put my analysis in there afterwards, and I asked Claude, what are the main differences between your analysis and mine?
Okay.
And Claude was being deferential, so it said my analysis expanded on his analysis by these different ways. And I'm thinking this was 2 half-minute interventions. And what that led me to believe is that there's a ton that's possible with regards to listening that AI facilitates. And you've got Howard Craze, you've got a lot of people talking about listening in the workplace. And, as we move back, and we're starting to see it, and I'm doing another research project with LUMAPS called the Future Work Index. And I want everybody to go out and complete the survey, even though it's a few minutes long. What we're looking at is what the future of internal comms, leadership, and AI have to do with each other. So that's an important survey. But I want to get back to this question, which is, how do you get the data to come out of the system? How do you produce decent data from an AI system? Well, and how do you have it empower your listening?
Mm-hmm.
If you do one qualitative question on your homepage every day, questions like, what's the biggest thing that you're working on right now? Or what's the biggest challenge facing the company? You run that one question once a week, you run the results into Claude, and you've got, a comprehensive company-wide listening platform that you've literally paid $20 for.
Yeah, isn't it? But isn't that scary?
$20 a month.
$20 a month. You've literally got the same thing, but for $20 a month.
Right. And one of the trends that Janet Hitchen and I are talking about is something called command and control 2.0, when organizations are getting into a more directive form of leadership, mm-hmm. which they are. They have to, because we don't know what's going to happen in the world economy from one day to another. And organizations have to say, we're doing this, we're standing for this, we're going in this direction, even if the winds and the waves go in different ways from time to time. Now, so that means we're moving away from kind of the collaborative consensus involvement approach that's evolved particularly since, we've come back from COVID. And I can talk a bit about how, that's not necessarily such a bad thing for communication folk. In fact, this could actually be a bigger opportunity than COVID in a lot of ways. But one thing that makes command and control 2.0 different from the old school boss says, managers cascade, you do mentality, is that you've got the ability to do real-time listening for no money instantaneously, simply by asking one qualitative question on your homepage every day. It could be the same question, or you could have a rotation of 3 or 4, and you can track where the sentiment is, where the priorities are, where the challenges are, instantaneously with zero bullshit and damn near zero cost.
And isn't that, this is why I get so excited about the AI thing. And Mike, that's a brilliant way of looking at it. The why I get so excited, not just about this thing, which I call the 5th industrial revolution, but also where AI sits in this, because AI is one part of it, and this new intelligence world we're going to be in. And emotional intelligence is part of it, organizational intelligence is part of it, and independent intelligence. And what you're really saying there is, with all that data coming into the organization, just from that simple thing that you can do, you can then use an AI system to do something which is almost superhuman, because there'd be too much noise almost to do it. I'm sure there's SaaS companies that do something similar, but actually now, as the internal communicator, you can really lead that project. I think that's why I get so excited about AI stuff, because it actually empowers individuals to become almost superhuman in what they can do, so much more productive. But they have to do it in the right way, if that makes sense, Mike. Like, AI is not going to just take over their role, but I think the cliche. I think, in fact, actually, was it the boss of NVIDIA just said the same thing? It's funny because I've been saying it for a couple of years, and people have been rolling their eyes. But AI won't replace you, but somebody using AI might. Yeah. But the new superpowered internal communicator is going to use AI, right? Because they've got all that data. As long as they ask for it, they've got it. Does that make sense?
Well, it does, with a couple of caveats. One is that you've got a lot of organizations that are being really skittish about the use of AI. It's the same stuff that you hear from IT departments. Bearing in mind that AI is the ultimate change program in an organization, because AI changes damn near every single bit of software instantaneously with no governance. And part of, a big chunk of my work over the years has been involved with change communication around systems integrations, introduction of new software. And, you would spend 18 months with like Gantt charts covering this wall all the way, damn near across the Atlantic, for dealing with one change, with, engagements and PMO minutes and, continuous debate about which function does what. AI does that for every single thing a business does instantaneously for near zero cost and, with no governance. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people in organizations who've been driving the governance, have been driving the policy stuff, naturally are scared shitless about this. And so they're throwing the brakes on this. Yeah. So we're kind of creating a two-tier workforce. You've got one tier where there's a reasonable embrace of AI tools and a reasonable empowerment of people to either use the tools that they see fit, or at least use a decent and accessible commercial suite of tools that creates an AI baseline in the organization. And then you've got this other group that is dealing with 1980s era technology. And then you get stuff like what happens with the Signal Gate case in the US, where people just simply bypass the existing systems, go on public platforms, to hell with the security, with the protocols. Yeah, totally. And then you have total anarchy.
But hasn't it always been the way? Because this has always been I've worked in digital transformation for 20 years, and this has always been one of the things, right? That human beings will find a way. I talk about it in my book, and I talk about the how-to guide for an AI in the future for leaders. And one of the first chapters around that is about this very thing, the thing about the secret cyborg. And actually the organizational danger potentially of the secret cyborg. This is people who are using AI systems, as you've said yourself there, Mike, never use the free one. You'd be amazed how many people are doing so and putting company data on there. But even with the paid ones, they might be going outside of the AI policy, or even worse, there is no AI policy, or the AI policy is simply don't use AI. Because human beings are always going to find a way to make their lives easier, right? And AI does that.
Right, and you have the added problem of not knowing where the breaches are.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've got AI integrated with your systems, you've got some idea of some ability to monitor what's going in and what's going out. Mm-hmm. And that's gonna that might give you a suboptimal AI suite. One of the things that comms people should do in an organization like this is really put that hand on the wheel on AI strategy. Continually be monitoring new tools and continually be monitoring how people are using them. In fact, one of the things that I'd like to do in my strategic magazine role is collect reviews of AI tools from communication leaders.
Oh, what a great
Because
idea.
nobody's doing this. We've got the ability to do this.
What a great idea. What a
You
great
know,
idea.
if you've got something to review, write a couple hundred words on it, and I'll have the review up, and then, you know, within a couple of days.
That would really help everybody out there, because there are so many tools. Like in the book that I wrote, there's 111 just in that one, but there are hundreds of tools. I mean, there's so many of these different tools. It's a fascinating new world when there's so many different tools. But if we could start having reviews up there that internal comms people can look at and kind of verify and the rest, I think that would be really helpful. Of course, that might be a great question for everybody else on the call, but
right, I can set up a separate section of Strategic Magazine that's focused on AI reviews if I can find 10 people who are willing to kick the ball off.
I am very willing from an AI and an AI training point of view to review things, but I think the internal comms would be even better. I mean, one of the big ones, of course, is, and this is now going a little bit off piece, Mike, so my apologies, but Copilot would be, I always find it fascinating where Copilot is at the moment. And don't get me started on the fact that Microsoft should be ahead of the game rather than behind it. But, you know, it's a little bit like we all say that, you know, we should all use Teams, but of course Zoom exists for a reason, right? So, you know, not here to bash Microsoft in any way. In fact, I might be doing some work with them future in the next year. Which leads me into
that's critical about Copilot, because, you know, Copilot might be the Skoda Octavia of AI tools. You know, it's functional, it's not the sexiest, and it doesn't do everything that the sexier models do, but it's better than nothing. It gets you from point A to point B to a certain extent. The more efficiently and effectively those who are using Copilot can use it, can develop that practice, the less of a problem it's going to be, or the better case you're going to have for upgrading the tools. So, and we've got so many people working in Copilot in isolation. If you want to share your Copilot experiences, send them to editor at strategic-hq.com, strategic-hq.com, and we'll set up a session on AI reviews or even on Copilot.
I think that'd be, I mean, really powerful around the whole Copilot moment, because there's a huge amount. In fact, actually, the research that I was doing with Natasha, and I'll link to that. But that one of those big questions in that is, you know, are you using Copilot, or which different ones are you using? And of course, we're seeing that more and more people are using Copilot. So I'll definitely link to that. I've got one more question for you though, Mike, and we've only got maybe a couple of minutes. So I'm going to talk about this future of work, and because I think we can safely say that it's going to be defined by AI. I think it was the CEO of was it Shopify or one of the bigger tech things, Spotify?
Yeah, it was Shopify.
Yeah, Shopify. And he basically said, from now on, you've all got to justify how you're using AI, not the fact that you're going to use it, but actually how you're using it inside your job. I think we're going to get there pretty close. But I suppose with AI and automation, my biggest thing is this kind of new collaborative approach that we're going to need to do. We're going to have to knock down silos. I know me and you have been talking about the knocking down of silos to tech and communication and leadership for a very long time.
I have a Silo Smashers course online. If you want to find out more about it, get in touch with me after you've listened to this.
Right, even better. Everyone go and find a thing, because it's one of the biggest things about company culture change, of course, is that knocking down of those silos. I mean, it does also help if you all train together and you all learn stuff together, because that's a really good way. But I'm going to kind of end with that kind of final thought for you to kind of come back to, which is, this is a big moment of change for us all. What do you see to be the kind of the quickest win for the people on the call in this kind of new collaborative world that we're in? I love the fact you're actually talking about this command and conquer 2.0, because I can definitely see that coming. But what is the collaboration things they can do today to kind of have a quick win in their organization?
I think the key thing is to get your teams to use to use at least one of the same tools, so that you can integrate what they're doing. You can say, what is the team doing? How are we doing? What do people think of it? You know, particularly, I mean, you know, the key, you know, I don't have a particular use case for this, but the more people on your team who are using the same tool together, the more opportunity there is for collaborative synergy. Now, I don't think that's necessarily the highest and best use of your time right now. I think the highest and best use of your time is getting together that suite of services that you're going to collaborate on. The ones I tend to use Claude, I tend to use Perplexity, I'm using Ideogram for images. Those are kind of my three go-tos at this point. There's some that I'm experimenting with for slides. I haven't found one that's totally happy, but experiment first, build a suite second, and then look at how you're going to expand the suite third.
I absolutely love that. It's fantastic and always succinct and always precise, Mike. I love that. Obviously, myself, I do quite a bit of AI training, and I've learned a lot of the tools over the last 5 years. I'm with you. I haven't found one yet that is amazing at PowerPoint slides quite yet. Gamma's not bad, and there's Napkin, and there's a couple of others. And I think Google's going to be doing something behind the scenes. And even I kind of pray that Copilot gets better, but we'll see, isn't it? That is the future of it. All I can say, Mike, is massive thanks, mate. I say you were one of the inspirations to do these calls every couple of weeks. I'll link to that survey for you as well, and everyone who's come, and I'll make sure everyone gets that information. I'll also may do the same in the next couple of weeks for the work that me and Natasha are doing too. But that's the thing. So really, where would people find you, Mike? Of course, everyone knows you, but just in case, where would they find you?
Mike.Klein@changingtheterms.com.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks, Mike. You are a legend. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Dan. You're a legend too.